tell you guys a little bit about some really interesting little lizards called geckos. So I'll start with these guys here. So these are leopard geckos. They come from areas in and around Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, with similar species in countries like Turkey and West India. The habitat they come from is typically xeric and arid, so very dry. Areas like semi-desert, for example. And they can be areas with quite extremes of temperature, so very hot summers but also quite cool winters. They are nocturnal, so come out during the night, with some occasionally having more crepuscular behaviours, so that means that they can be active at dawn and dusk. Leopard geckos get their name from the fact that, in their natural habitat, the yellow background and black spots resemble the pattern of leopards. This one here has fewer spots than a wild individual because of selective breeding for less spots and brighter colours. So, if I compare this one to this one here, you can see that they look quite different. The reason this one's colour looks so different is because it is an albino. You probably think it doesn't look much like an albino because we're more used to seeing albino mammals, which are usually white in colour or a pale yellow with bright red eyes. Reptile and bird albinos, however, are usually quite a lot more colourful. In reptiles, for example, you typically get two types of albinos depending on which of two mutations they have. If you have a tyrosinase positive albino, that means that the animal can produce an enzyme called tyrosinase, which means it can make a little bit of dark pigment. A break later in the melanin, or dark coloration pigment chain, means that the animal can never complete the full dark colouring. However, if a reptile albino is tyrosinase negative, that means it can barely make even the start of a dark pigment, and those animals will usually be even brighter in colour. Inside their enclosure, which is called a vivarium or terrarium, you'll see they have quite a few lights. The first is a heat bulb to keep an area nice and warm for them. This is important because lizards, like all reptiles, are ectothermic, also known as cold-blooded, which means they can't heat themselves biologically in the same way that mammals and birds can. The heat bulb therefore gives a warm area of the enclosure, which sets up a thermal gradient against the cooler parts of the enclosure. This means the leopard geckos can regulate their own body temperature by moving to a warmer or a cooler part of the tank, just like they would in the wild by moving in or out of sun-warmed areas. The other bulbs up here are mainly for light. One is a daylight bulb that simulates the wavelengths of natural sunlight for the lizards, but also for the plants that are growing here. The final bulb, which looks similar to the daylight bulb, is a specialised UV bulb that emits a wavelength of light called UVB. UVB is required in reptiles to help them synthesize, or make, a vitamin called vitamin D3, which they require in order to utilise calcium in their diet for them to grow or produce eggshells. There we go, so that's all of our leopard geckos. It's nearly time for me to go anyway, so all the lights will be turning off and it will essentially become night time for them. And also, one thing I didn't mention earlier is that their light is attached to a thermostat. So if we look at the back there, that black probe that's sticking out of the soil there, so that's a thermostatic probe. So all of our reptiles, when they're heated, their light bulbs and their light fixtures are attached to a thermostat. There you go, so you can see the red light was off a second ago, but now it's on again. And basically what the thermostat does is the thermostatic probe senses when the temperature is as warm as it needs to be, and then it will dim the bulb and turn it off so it doesn't overheat. Other geckos that are similar to leopard geckos include these little dudes and dudettes. These are fat-tailed geckos. They come from many tropical countries in West Africa. These guys, like leopard geckos, prefer to come out at night, so they are also nocturnal. You might just be able to see that their pupil is vertical and slit-like in appearance, and by constricting or dilating it, so making it smaller or bigger, they are able to let in enough light to see what they are doing, even if it is very dark. In daylight, the pupil is very slit-like because it doesn't need to let much light in. However, at night, it is much larger to let in as much light as possible. Typically, nocturnal reptiles struggle to see red wavelengths of light, so by heating these guys with a red bulb at night time, they can go about their business undisturbed. They get the common name of fat-tailed geckos from the plump tails they have. Many lizards, especially these guys, use their tails as a fat store to build up supplies when there's plenty to eat, just in case they need to use up that fat later when there is less food available. You do have to be very careful with their tails, however, because they are able to snap them off. That is a process called caudal autotomy, and they often use it in order to evade getting eaten by predators. So what they'll do in the wild is, if they feel threatened for whatever reason, they can actually use the muscles in their tail to sever their own tail. The tail breaks off, it will kind of twitch and shake around. There's a lot of muscle contractions that go on for a while, even when the tail has come away from the body of the lizard. And what this does is it basically serves as a distraction to the predator, so the predator will eat the tail, lizard has a chance to run away, and it lives to fight another day. Now, most lizards are capable of regenerating their tails once they've lost them. In a minute, I'll show you some of our other geckos that actually can only lose their tail once. Once that tail is lost, that's it, they can't grow it back, so they only have kind of like one extra life if you think of it like that. Like I was saying a second ago, yeah, the tail serves as a fat store for the animal. So even if the predator only eats the tail and the rest of the lizard gets away, the predator's actually getting a pretty nutritionally and calorifically dense meal because it's getting all of the lizard's fat stores. So lizards normally won't want to lose their tail unless it's a last resort, because it takes them quite a long time to gain all of that fat. So from the top, I thought I would just tell you a little bit about why they're both slightly different colours. So the white stripe is a natural occurrence in fat-tailed geckos. The expression of it is led by a recessive gene. So in order for a fat-tailed gecko to have a white stripe, it needs to have two copies of the recessive gene, one from the mother and one from the father. If it only has one copy of the recessive gene, it might be a carrier of the white stripe, in the same way as you can get some brown-eyed parents that are carriers of the blue-eye gene, and hence their kids might have blue eyes. But it will not express the white stripe itself unless it has both of those recessive genes. Alright, so now I can move on to our last gecko species, which is quite different from the other two that I've shown you already today. So these that I've got here, these are crested geckos. Now, crested geckos are quite different from the leopard geckos and fat-tailed geckos in as much as they are completely arboreal. So the word arboreal basically just means that they live off the ground, so up in trees. So where the leopard and fat-tailed gecko are what we call terrestrial lizards. So by terrestrial, I mean they do live on the ground, they don't really climb around too much. These guys, crested geckos, are completely opposite. So in their natural habitat, which is New Caledonia, which is basically an island off the east coast of Queensland, Australia essentially, they're a lot more at home being in the trees. In fact, they don't really come to the ground at all in the wild, apart from the females who will come to the ground occasionally to lay eggs in the soil. Now, these geckos are amazing little lizards, and one of the things that makes them such good climbers, and they're able to climb not only on trees but also on walls, even upside down on ceilings, is because they have these really sticky little toes. Basically, on the underside of their toes, microscopically, they've got these tiny, tiny little hairs, and those hairs are so small that when they kind of push together, they're able to utilise one of the forces that binds particles together. It's called van der Waals forces. So these guys are even able to climb on really smooth surfaces like glass because those microscopic tiny little hairs are able to grip even the tiniest imperfections that we can't see with our naked eyes. You're going to jump. Here we go. So, here we go. This is perfect. So as long as I don't get my reflection in the way, from here, when they're stuck on the glass, you'll be able to see their sticky toes. So on the underside of their toe, and hopefully you'll just about be able to make it out, they have lamellae. So the lamellae are basically a series of plates, and on those plates are the microscopic hairs. So we won't be able to see them because again they're microscopic. So this guy, if I usher him in a sec, as well as just being able to stick to it, he will be able to walk up it. There we go. Now, one thing that actually makes crested geckos even different from all the other kinds of arboreal geckos you get out there is they also have a sticky pad right on the end of their tail. If I show you with this one, and remember you have to be really careful with lizards' tails because even these guys can break them off. If I just run my finger underneath the tail here, you can see she will actually use it to grip my finger. And that's because right on the end, there's this tiny sticky little pad, the exact same as what they have on their feet. So it means they're really, really good climbers, and they can use their tail as what's known as an anchor point. So if I show you again, just run my finger under the tail, she will actually come up and grip it, almost like an anchor. So if for any reason she falls, she's got that tail kind of secured just to catch her fall. Now, if you have a look at these two, there you go, you can see he's jumping around. If you look at these two, and you focus in particular on their eyes, you'll see that their eyes look very, very wide open, certainly compared to the fat-tailed geckos and the leopard geckos I had. Ooh. Now, actually, these guys have an eye which is essentially fixed closed. Now, I know that sounds really, really weird, because if it was closed, how come you can see the eyeball, you can see the pupils and everything like that? This eye in these animals has a protective scale over it called a brill. Now, this eye scale, this brill, also known as an ocular scale, so it's got the two names, brill or ocular scale, the brill itself basically helps protect the eyeball from dust. So essentially, it's like their eye is closed, but their eyelid is see-through. If you think of it like that, it's completely protected in the same way as if we had our eyes closed, but they can see through their eyelid. So this scale basically means that they don't blink. They have no need to blink. Obviously, we blink to clean our eyes, and if you look at him there, where he was doing that with the tongue, what they therefore have to do, because they can't blink to clean their eyes, is they will use their tongue in order to lick them clean if they ever get any dirt or debris or anything stuck on them, so they can see more clearly. You can also see in these guys, especially if he stays how he is now, that there's a little hole in the head there. Now, that is essentially the ear. Now, reptiles, unlike mammals, don't have any pinna. So what I mean by pinna is basically the outer part of the ear that we are used to seeing, especially in humans. So they don't have that. There's no outer part of the ear. They've literally got a hole in the head. It leads through to the inner ear complex, eardrum, everything like that. So they can still hear. It just looks a little bit different. These guys, crested geckos, a little bit like the fat-tailed geckos and the leopard geckos, they are nocturnal. So they have a red light because these guys don't really see red wavelengths of light. So what that means is, even though they can still be heated in their enclosure because of the heat coming from the bulb, and we can still see them because of course we can see red, it does mean that these guys can go about their nighttime activities, and for them it's as if it's completely dark. So you can see there the pupil is already a lot wider, it's not really slit-like, so that's to let in more light. If I show you this one now, you can see again, because I've turned on the lights, so it's daylight, that pupil is shrunk down a lot more. So it's very slit-like now, and that's because there's so much bright light, the pupil doesn't need to be open to let lots of it into the eye. And this is their enclosure. So these guys, because they're arboreal, they've got a much taller enclosure than the leopard geckos and the fat-tailed geckos have. So when all of the lights are turned off, and again they've got a UV light for the day, and there's another bulb up there as well, so they've got a UV light there, and just there is a bulb which helps plants grow, because as well as some plastic vines in here, I've recently planted some live plants. And of course, like all plants, they need to photosynthesize, and in order to do that they need natural wavelengths of light. This is one of our other crested geckos, and this guy doesn't have a tail at all. Now earlier you might have remembered me saying when I was talking about the fat-tailed geckos that these animals are able to lose their tails. It's a process called caudal autotomy, where they're able to drop their tail so that they can escape a predator. However, with crested geckos, unlike with fat tails and leopard geckos, when cresties lose their tail, they can't grow it back, they can't regenerate it. So they're basically left with a little stump where the tail used to be. So it's healed over nicely now, so it hasn't got any cuts, any grazes, but they won't regrow their tail, as opposed to leopard and fat-tailed geckos that will. Alright, and yeah, that brings us to the end basically. So you've seen all of our geckos we've got here. I think they're all really cool, they're all really different and unique in their own ways, and yeah, hopefully you've learned a little bit about them.